She knocked at 2:47 a.m. By dawn, 50 bikers had followed her into the storm. On a stormy October night in rural Montana, a 6-year-old girl appeared at the door of the Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club's lodge, trembling, soaking wet, and crying. The wind howled through the pines, and lightning split the sky over the mountains. Through her tears, she managed only 3 words. He took Mommy. What happened next would bring an entire brotherhood to its knees. The bikers, hardened men marked by war, loss, and silence, had seen violence before. They had ridden through deserts and blizzards, buried friends, and lived with scars that never fully healed. But none had ever seen fear like hers. The way her small body shook, the way her voice broke when she spoke, the way she looked at them with desperate, pleading eyes that said, "You're my only hope." Without hesitation, they dropped everything. Engines roared to life in the rain. Leather vests were zipped, helmets were fastened, and 50 men followed a child into the darkness, riding toward an unknown danger with nothing but instinct and honor to guide them. What they discovered on that rain-soaked road wasn't just a rescue, it was redemption. A promise kept to a little girl who believed strangers could be heroes. And when the sun rose over the mountains, the entire town of Millstone Creek would wake to a story that would leave them in tears. This is the story of the night that changed everything. Before you continue, please like and subscribe so you never miss stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption. The rain came down hard that night, the kind that turned dirt roads into rivers and made the world feel small and dangerous. Thunder rolled across the mountains like distant artillery fire, and the wind bent the pines until they groaned. The storm had been building all evening, dark clouds swallowing the stars one by one, until the sky was nothing but a churning black mass. Inside the Iron Ridge Lodge, the fire crackled low in the stone hearth, casting long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. A dozen men sat scattered around the room, nursing beers and whiskey, staring into the flames with the kind of silence that comes from shared history and unspoken pain. These weren't weekend riders. They were veterans, ex-cons, widowers, men who'd found family in the roar of engines and the unspoken code of the road. The walls were covered with decades of biker culture. Old license plates from every state, faded photographs of rides long past, club patches from chapters across the country. A vintage Harley engine sat mounted above the bar, polished to a dull shine. The air smelled of leather, motor oil, wood smoke, and the faint tang of whiskey. Jack Reaper Colton sat nearest the door, his usual spot. He was 53, grey-bearded, with eyes that had seen too much, and a face carved by wind and loss. His hands, scarred and calloused, wrapped around a glass of bourbon that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He was thinking about his daughter again, always thinking about her. She'd been gone 7 years now, a car accident on a winter night much like this one. 18 years old, bright, full of life. And then, in an instant, gone. He didn't talk about it, none of them did. That was the unspoken rule here. You carried your pain quietly, and your brothers carried it with you. Across the room, a man they called Patch was tinkering with a bike chain, his brow furrowed in concentration. Bear, a giant of a man with arms like tree trunks, was playing pool with a younger rider named Corey, who'd only been patched in 6 months ago. The jukebox in the corner hummed quietly, playing old Lynyrd Skynyrd, the kind of music that felt like home. Outside, the rain intensified. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the rows of motorcycles parked under a metal awning. Harleys mostly, some old Triumphs, a few custom choppers that had been built in the shop out back. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, hesitant, almost lost beneath the sound of the storm. Then it came again, louder, more frantic, desperate. Reaper's head snapped up. The room went still. Every man in that lodge had honed instincts born from years on the road, years in combat, years surviving in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. Reaper stood slowly, setting his glass down on the table. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he crossed to the door. Behind him the others rose too, hands instinctively moving toward pockets, toward weapons, toward readiness. He opened the door, and there she stood, a little girl, no more than 6 years old, drenched to the bone. Her blonde hair stuck to her face in wet tangles. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She wore a pink nightgown torn at the hem, and her bare feet were muddy and scratched. She was shivering so violently she could barely stand. For a moment, Reaper couldn't move. He saw his daughter standing there, saw her as she'd been at that age. Small, innocent, trusting. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. "He took Mommy." Reaper's heart stopped. The world narrowed to just this moment, this child, this plea. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her level. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle, a tone none of the other bikers had heard from him in years. "Who took her, sweetheart?" "The bad man. In the truck. He hurt her." The girl's voice cracked, and tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain. "She told me to run. She said, 'Find help.' She said, 'Run and don't look back.'" Reaper turned to the others. Every man in that room was already on his feet, faces hard, jaws set. They didn't need words. They understood. "Where?" Reaper asked the girl, his voice still gentle but urgent now. The girl pointed down the road, toward the mountains, where the storm was darkest. "The old barn, past the creek. I ran so far." Reaper stood and looked at Patch. "Call the sheriff. Tell him we're heading out. Tell him what we know." Patch nodded and pulled out his phone. Reaper looked at Bear. "Get blankets. Get her warm." Then he turned to the others. "Gear up. Now." There was no hesitation, no questions, just movement, fast, coordinated, purposeful. Within 2 minutes, engines roared to life in the rain. 50 headlights pierced the darkness, cutting through sheets of water that fell like curtains. The sound was thunder on earth, a rolling, relentless growl that shook the ground. The girl, wrapped in Reaper's oversized leather jacket, climbed onto the back of his bike. Her small arms wrapped around his waist, and she pressed her face against his back. "Hold on tight," Reaper said. "We're going to get your mum." She nodded against him, and he felt her shaking, not just from cold, but from fear. Reaper kicked his bike into gear. Behind him the convoy formed, a steel serpent of brotherhood and fury, ready to ride into hell itself if that's what it took. They rode into the storm like warriors of old, men who had lost everything, now riding to save someone else's everything. The rain hammered down, the lightning lit the road in bursts of white fire, and the Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club disappeared into the night, following a terrified child toward an unknown horror. The road was barely visible through the rain. Water pooled in the ruts, turning the dirt path into a muddy river. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches and sending debris skittering across the road. But Reaper didn't slow down. Neither did the others. They rode in tight formation, headlights cutting through the storm like blades. The sound of 50 engines filled the night, a deep, primal roar that drowned out even the thunder. It was the sound of purpose, of solidarity, of men who had found something worth fighting for. The girl clung to Reaper's back, her small arms wrapped tight around his waist. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just held on, her face pressed against the worn leather of his vest. He could feel her trembling, could feel the fear radiating from her small body, and it fueled something inside him, something he thought had died years ago. Behind them, the convoy stretched like a steel serpent winding through the mountains. Patch rode beside Reaper, his phone pressed to his ear, shouting over the wind and the engines. "Sheriff's not answering," Patch yelled. "Dispatch says they're out on another call. Domestic disturbance on the other side of the county." Reaper cursed under his breath, of course. In a town this small, with a sheriff's department that had maybe 6 deputies, they were always stretched thin. "We don't wait," Reaper shouted back. Patch nodded and tucked his phone away. He understood. They all did. Sometimes the law couldn't get there in time. Sometimes you had to be your own law. The road climbed higher into the mountains, the trees closing in on either side like walls. The rain turned colder, sharper, stinging exposed skin. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the landscape in brief, stark bursts. Twisted pines, rocky outcroppings, the dark outline of mountains looming above. The girl tapped Reaper's shoulder. He slowed just enough to hear her over the storm. "Turn here," she said, her voice small but steady, pointing to a narrow dirt path barely visible between the trees. Reaper signaled. The convoy slowed and turned, following him onto the path. The path was rough. Branches scraped their arms, mud sprayed from the tires, roots jutted up like traps waiting to catch a wheel. But they pressed on. These men had ridden through worse. War zones, deserts, blizzards. They'd ridden through grief and loss and pain that never ended. A muddy mountain path in a storm was nothing. The trees thickened, blocking out what little light the storm allowed. The world became a tunnel of darkness, broken only by the headlights that bounced and swayed with every turn. The air smelled of wet earth, pine sap, and something else, something faint and metallic that made Reaper's instincts flare. After what felt like miles, the girl tapped his shoulder again. "Stop," she whispered. Reaper raised his fist. The signal passed down the line. Engines cut one by one. Silence fell, broken only by the rain hammering against leather and metal. Ahead, through the rain and the darkness, they saw it, an old barn leaning and rotted, its roof half collapsed. A single light flickered inside, weak and yellow, barely visible through cracks in the wood. And parked in front of it was a battered red pickup truck, its engine still ticking as it cooled. Reaper killed his engine. The others did the same. The sudden silence was deafening, filled only by the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. He turned to the girl. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Stay here with Patch," Reaper said gently but firmly. "You understand? Don't move, don't make a sound." She nodded, her lips trembling. Reaper dismounted and motioned to the others. 30 men moved forward, silent as shadows despite their size. They fanned out, surrounding the barn from all sides. These were men who knew how to move in the dark, how to coordinate without words, how to be ghosts when they needed to be. Bear moved to the left, taking 5 men with him. Corey went right with another group. The rest formed a line behind Reaper. Reaper approached the barn door slowly, his boots squelching in the mud. His hand rested on the rusted handle. His heart pounded. Not from fear, but from adrenaline, from the anticipation of what lay beyond that door. Then he heard it, a woman's scream, muffled but desperate, filled with pain and terror. Reaper's jaw clenched. He looked back at his brothers. They nodded. "Ready." He kicked the door open with a crash that echoed through the storm. If you're watching from Millstone Creek or anywhere in Montana, drop a comment and let us know where you're from. Stories like this remind us why community matters. The barn was dark, lit only by a single hanging bulb that swung in the wind, casting erratic shadows across the walls. The smell hit them first. Mold, rust, animal filth, and something worse. Fear, pain, desperation. The barn was old, its wooden beams warped and cracked, its floor covered in rotting hay and broken tools. Rain leaked through holes in the roof, dripping steadily into puddles on the ground. The walls were lined with rusted farm equipment, an old plow, chains, hooks hanging from nails. On the far side of the barn, near a collapsed stall, a woman lay on the ground, her wrists bound with rope. Her face was bruised and swollen, her lips split and bleeding. Her clothing was torn. She was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering as she tried to focus. Standing over her was a man in his 40s, lean and wiry, with wild eyes and a face twisted by rage and drugs. Tattoos covered his arms, crude prison ink, gang symbols, a history written in scars and bad decisions. He held a knife, a hunting blade, long and serrated, the kind meant for gutting game. When he saw the bikers, he froze. His eyes went wide, then narrowed. He raised the knife higher, pointing it at them like a ward against evil. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled, his voice high and nervous, cracking with paranoia. Reaper stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. His voice, when he spoke, was low and cold, the voice of a man who had killed before and would do it again if necessary. "Put the knife down." The man laughed, a high, nervous sound that bounced off the walls. "You think I'm scared of you? You don't know who you're messing with. I got connections. I got people." "I don't care," Reaper said, his voice flat. "Put the knife down or we take it from you." The man's eyes darted to the door, to the windows, calculating his chances. He was thinking about running, thinking about fighting, thinking about how this had all gone so wrong, so fast. "She's mine," the man said, his voice rising. "She owes me. She tried to run. Nobody runs from me." "She's not yours," Reaper said, taking another step forward. "Nobody belongs to you." The man's face twisted with rage. "You don't know what she did. She took my money. She tried to leave." "Because you hurt her," Reaper said. His voice was still calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Because you're a coward who beats women and scares little girls." The man's grip on the knife tightened. His knuckles went white. "I'll kill her. I swear to God, I'll kill her right now." Reaper stopped. The barn went silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Then Reaper spoke, and his voice was colder than the storm outside. "No, you won't." The man lunged. He didn't get far. Two bikers, Bear and a man named Diesel, rushed him from the side. Bear's massive hand caught the man's wrist mid-swing, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. Diesel drove his shoulder into the man's ribs, sending him crashing to the ground face first. Within seconds, the man was pinned, his arms wrenched behind his back, his face pressed into the dirt and hay. He screamed, he cursed, he threatened, but it meant nothing. Reaper knelt beside the woman. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain and shock. "Your daughter," Reaper said gently, his voice soft now, almost tender. "Emma, she's safe. She brought us here." The woman's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her bruised cheeks, cutting trails through the dirt and blood. "Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby. Is she—" "She's outside. She's okay." Reaper pulled out a pocket knife and cut the ropes from her wrists. Her skin was raw and bleeding where the rope had bitten in. "We've got you. You're safe now." The woman sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal, somewhere that had held too much fear for too long. Behind him, Patch was on the phone with the sheriff again, this time getting through. "Yeah, we got her. Old barn off Timber Creek Road. Send an ambulance and bring cuffs. We got the guy." 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flooded the clearing, cutting through the rain and darkness. Sheriff Tom Garrett, a lean man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes, stepped out of his cruiser, followed by two deputies. He took one look at the scene. The bikers standing in a circle, the man on the ground cursing and spitting, the woman wrapped in blankets, and nodded slowly. "Reaper," he said. "Sheriff," Reaper replied. "You gonna tell me what happened here?" "Little girl came to our door, said her mom was taken. We followed her here, found this." Reaper gestured to the man on the ground. "He had a knife. We stopped him." The sheriff looked at the man, then at the woman, then back at Reaper. "You hurt him?" "Not yet," Bear rumbled. The sheriff almost smiled. "Appreciate the restraint." He motioned to his deputies. "Cuff him, read him his rights, and get an ambulance for the woman." The man was hauled to his feet, screaming threats that grew more desperate and incoherent as the deputies dragged him to the patrol car. Paramedics arrived moments later, wrapping the woman in blankets, checking her vitals, loading her onto a stretcher. And then Emma appeared, running through the rain, Patch jogging behind her, trying to keep up. "Mommy!" she screamed. The woman's head turned, her eyes found her daughter, and she reached out with trembling hands. Emma crashed into her mother's arms, and the two collapsed into each other, sobbing and clinging, holding on like they'd never let go. Every biker stood in silence, rain streaming down their faces, leather jackets soaked through. Not one of them moved, not one of them spoke. They had ridden into hell to save a stranger, and in doing so, they had saved themselves. By the time the sun rose, the storm had passed. The sky over Millstone Creek was soft and pink, streaked with gold as dawn broke over the mountains. The air was clean and cool, washed fresh by the night's rain. Birds sang in the pines, and the world felt new. Emma and her mother, Sarah, were taken to Millstone Creek General Hospital for observation. The doctors said they'd be fine, physically at least. Sarah had bruises, cuts, rope burns on her wrists, and signs of trauma that would take time to heal. Emma was unharmed physically, but the fear in her eyes would linger. But Emma refused to leave without saying goodbye. She stood in the hospital parking lot, still wearing Reaper's oversized leather jacket that hung past her knees, and looked up at the 50 men who had followed her into the darkness. They stood in a loose formation, exhausted and soaked, their bikes parked in neat rows behind them. They looked like what they were, warriors who had just returned from battle. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice small but steady. Reaper knelt down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. His eyes, grey and weathered, met hers. "You're the bravest kid I've ever met. You saved your mom." Emma shook her head, her blonde hair still damp and tangled. "You saved her." "We both did," Reaper said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't felt in years. She hugged him then, a long, tight hug that broke something open inside him, something that had been closed and locked and buried for 7 years. He wrapped his arms around her, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine this was his daughter, to imagine she was still here, to imagine he'd been given a second chance. When Emma pulled away, she looked at the others. "Are you angels?" One of the bikers, Bear, the giant with arms like tree trunks, let out a rough laugh. "No, sweetheart, we're just bikers." "Bikers are better than angels," Emma said seriously. The men laughed, deep, genuine laughter that came from relief and joy and something deeper. Some wiped their eyes, some turned away to hide their faces. Sarah approached, leaning heavily on a nurse. Her face was still bruised, swollen, painted with pain, but her eyes were clear and filled with gratitude that words couldn't express. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved our lives. You didn't have to. You didn't know us. But you came anyway." "You don't need to thank us," Reaper replied quietly. "Just be safe, be happy. That's all we want." Sarah nodded, tears streaming again. "I will. We will. Because of you." As the bikers mounted their bikes and prepared to leave, a crowd had gathered. Townspeople stood along the street, mothers holding children, fathers with hands in pockets, elderly folks on porches. They clapped. Some cheered. Some just stood in respectful silence. The Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club rode out of Millstone Creek that morning, not as outlaws or outcasts, but as heroes. The sound of their engines, that deep, primal roar, echoed through the valley like a promise kept. News of the rescue spread fast. By midday, it was on the local news. By evening, it had gone viral across social media platforms. "Bikers save woman and child in daring midnight rescue," read the headlines. The story was shared thousands of times. Videos of the convoy rolling into town played on loop. Interviews with townspeople who had witnessed the bikers' arrival filled the airwaves. "They came out of nowhere," one woman said on camera. 50 motorcycles in the middle of a storm. It was like something out of a movie. "They didn't ask for anything," another man said. "They just rode out there and brought that woman and her little girl home. That's what heroes do." But for the men of Iron Ridge, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be captured in a news segment or a viral video. Back at the lodge, Reaper sat alone by the fire. The rain had returned, softer this time, tapping gently against the windows. He stared into the flames, thinking about his daughter, about Emma, about second chances and the weight of promises kept. Patch walked in, holding 2 beers. He handed one to Reaper and sat down in the chair beside him. "You did good, brother," Patch said. "We all did," Reaper replied, taking a long drink. "You know what this means, right?" Patch grinned. "Every kid in town's gonna want to ride now. We're gonna be the most popular guys in Millstone Creek." Reaper smiled. A rare thing, genuine and warm. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain, the crackle of the fire, the low hum of conversation from the other room where the rest of the club had gathered. Outside, the other bikers were gathered around a table, playing cards and laughing. The mood was lighter than it had been in months, maybe years. For men who had lost so much, marriages, jobs, family, purpose, this felt like something worth holding on to. Later that night, Reaper's phone buzzed, a text message. He didn't recognize the number at first. Then he read it. "This is Sarah. Emma wants to know if you'll come to her birthday party next month. She says you're her hero. I think you are too." Reaper stared at the screen for a long time. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed back, "I'll be there. Promise." He set the phone down and looked around the room. At these men, his brothers, his family. They had ridden into the storm for a little girl they didn't know, and in return she had given them something they thought was lost forever: purpose. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. It helps us share more stories of courage and brotherhood. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the Iron Ridge Lodge. It was in a small pink envelope, slightly wrinkled, with a hand-drawn heart on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in crayon, the letters uneven and crooked, written with the careful determination of a 6-year-old trying her best. Reaper opened it carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Dear Reaper and the bikers, thank you for saving my mommy. I was very scared, but you came and you were very brave. Mommy says you are heroes. I think you are too. I am having a birthday party and I want you to come. There will be cake and games. Please come. Love, Emma. P.S. Can I ride on your motorcycle?" At the bottom of the page was a drawing. A little girl holding hands with a man on a motorcycle. Stars filled the sky above them. Hearts floated around the edges. Reaper stared at the letter for a long time. Then he pinned it to the wall above the fireplace, right in the center where everyone could see it. Within minutes, every biker in the lodge had read it. Some smiled, some nodded, some just stared at it in silence, thinking about children they'd lost or left behind. "We going?" Bear asked, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "Damn right we're going," Reaper said. The next 2 weeks were spent preparing. The bikers pooled money to buy Emma a birthday present. A pink bicycle with training wheels, a helmet decorated with stars, and a basket for the front. They also bought gifts for Sarah, gift cards to local stores, groceries, things they knew a single mother struggling to rebuild her life would need. The day of the party arrived bright and clear. The sky was blue and endless, the kind of sky that only exists in Montana, vast, open, free. The bikers rolled up to Sarah's house in full formation, 50 bikes, polished and gleaming in the afternoon sun, their chrome reflecting light like mirrors. Emma stood on the front porch, her eyes wide with wonder. She wore a purple dress and a plastic tiara. When she saw them, she screamed with delight and ran. Reaper caught her in his arms, lifting her high. She laughed, a sound so pure and joyful it made the men smile wider than they had in years. "You came," she squealed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I made a promise," Reaper said, setting her down gently. The bikers stayed for hours. They played games with the kids. Pin the tail on the donkey, musical chairs, tag in the backyard. They ate cake and ice cream. They told stories, carefully edited versions of their rides, their adventures, their lives. The neighborhood came out to watch. Some joined in. Parents brought their children over to meet the bikers. Old fears and prejudices melted away in the warmth of the afternoon. By the end of the day, Sarah pulled Reaper aside. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. "You changed our lives," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if Emma hadn't found you. I don't like to think about it. But you were there. You came, and you saved us." "You would have done the same," Reaper said gently. "I hope so," Sarah whispered. "I really hope so." She hugged him, tight and grateful, and filled with the kind of emotion that doesn't need words. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the lawn, the bikers prepared to leave. Emma ran up to Reaper one more time. "Can I ride on your motorcycle now?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. Reaper looked at Sarah. She hesitated, then nodded. He lifted Emma onto the bike, settling her in front of him. He started the engine, just a low idle, nothing fast or dangerous. And he rode her slowly around the block, her laughter ringing out like bells. When they returned, Emma was beaming. "That was the best birthday present ever." Reaper smiled. "Happy birthday, Emma." The Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club rode out as the stars began to appear, engines rumbling low and steady. Emma waved from the porch, her mother's arm around her shoulders. Reaper looked back once. Then he faced the road ahead. Word of what the Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club had done continued to spread throughout the fall and into winter. People began to see them differently. Where once they were feared or avoided, crossed to the other side of the street when they walked by, whispered about in shops and diners, now they were respected. Parents waved, kids ran up to ask about the bikes, to touch the chrome, to hear the engines rev. Shop owners offered discounts. Waitresses at the diner gave them free coffee. The sheriff nodded when he saw them, a silent acknowledgement of respect between men who understood what it meant to protect. But more than that, new riders began to show up at the lodge. Men and a few women who had heard the story and wanted to be part of something meaningful, something bigger than themselves. "You saved that girl," one man said, standing nervously in the doorway of the lodge. He was in his 30s, lean and worn, with the look of someone who'd been knocked down by life too many times. "I saw it on the news. I read the articles, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to matter. I want to be part of something that matters." Reaper looked at him for a long moment, measuring him with eyes that had seen too many liars and phonies. Then he nodded slowly. "Then you're in. But understand this. It's not about glory. It's not about the attention or the praise. It's about showing up when it matters most. It's about being there when nobody else will. You understand?" The man nodded. "Good. What's your name?" "James." "All right, James. Welcome to Iron Ridge. Patch will get you set up." Over the next few months, the club grew. New patches were earned through rides, through service, through proving they understood what brotherhood truly meant. New bonds were forged over long nights at the lodge, over rides through the mountains, over shared meals and shared silence. And every new member heard the story of Emma, the little girl who knocked on the door in a storm and changed everything. The Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club became known for more than just riding. They escorted abuse survivors to court, standing as a wall of leather and muscle between terrified women and their abusers. They raised money for domestic violence shelters, organizing charity rides that drew hundreds of bikers from across the state. They showed up when people needed help, fixing roofs for elderly widows, moving furniture for single mothers, clearing snow from driveways in the dead of winter. And at the center of it all was Reaper, a man who had lost his daughter but found a new purpose in protecting others. One night, sitting by the fire with the rain tapping gently against the windows, Patch asked him the question that had been on everyone's mind. "You think she'd be proud?" Patch said quietly. "Your daughter?" Reaper stared into the flames for a long time. Then he smiled, small, sad but genuine. "Yeah, I think she would." They raised their beers in silence, to the dead, to the living, and to the little girl who reminded them all why they rode. Not everyone was happy about the Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club's newfound reputation. 6 months after the rescue, on a cold February night, a man walked into a bar on the edge of town. He was thin, wiry, covered in crude prison tattoos. His eyes were hard and cold, filled with barely contained rage. His name was Colt, and he had come looking for trouble. He was the brother of the man who had been arrested that night, the man who was now serving 10 years in state prison for kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. Colt had a reputation of his own, violence, intimidation, drugs. He'd spent more years inside than out, and he had a grudge that burned like acid in his gut. He found Reaper sitting at the bar, alone, nursing a whiskey after a long day. "You're the one," Colt said, sliding onto the stool beside him without invitation. Reaper didn't look up. His voice was flat, uninterested. "I'm a lot of things. You'll have to be more specific." "You're the one who sent my brother to prison." Reaper finally turned, his grey eyes meeting Colt's. There was no fear there, no hesitation, just calm, cold assessment. "Your brother sent himself to prison. He hurt a woman, terrified a child. He made his choices." Colt's jaw tightened. "Family's family. You don't turn on family. Not when they cross that line," Reaper said simply. "Some things are more important than blood." Colt leaned in close, his breath sour with cheap beer and anger. "You made an enemy, and I don't forget. Neither do my friends." Reaper stood slowly, tossing cash on the bar. He was taller than Colt, broader, and there was a weight to him. A presence born from years of fighting battles, both literal and internal. "Neither do I." He walked out into the cold night. Behind him, Colt watched with eyes full of hate. The next day, Reaper told the others. They gathered in the lodge, the fire crackling low, tension thick in the air. Patch wanted to confront Colt immediately. "We find him. We make it clear he stays away." Bear cracked his knuckles. "I say we pay him a visit. Remind him who he's messing with." But Reaper shook his head. "We do nothing unless he moves first. We don't start fights, but we finish them." The men agreed, though reluctantly, but they stayed vigilant, eyes open, ears to the ground. Weeks passed. Nothing happened, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air, thick and suffocating. Then one night, Reaper received a phone call. It was Sarah, and her voice was shaking with fear. "Someone came to the house," she said. "A man. He knocked on the door and he said my daughter should watch where she goes, that I should watch my back." Reaper's blood went cold. "Did he hurt you?" "No, he just left." "But Reaper, I'm scared." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Reaper said. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." He hung up, grabbed his jacket and motioned to the others. "We've got a problem." Within minutes, 15 bikes roared to life and headed towards Sarah's house. It was a year to the day since Emma had knocked on their door. The Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club gathered at the lodge to mark the occasion. Sarah and Emma were invited as guests of honor, along with dozens of townspeople who had come to see them as protectors, as friends, as family. Emma was taller now, more confident. She wore a small leather vest, a gift from Reaper, with a patch that read "Honorary Rider" stitched across the back. She beamed with pride every time someone noticed it. She stood in front of the fireplace, looking at the letter she had written a year ago, still pinned to the wall, now faded and curled at the edges, but treasured. "I was so scared that night," she said softly, her small voice carrying through the room. "I thought no one would help us. I thought we were going to die." The room went silent. "But then you came," Emma continued, looking at Reaper, at the men standing around him. "You didn't even know us, but you came anyway, and you saved us. Mommy says that's what heroes do, and I think you're all heroes." Reaper knelt beside her, his weathered face soft with emotion. "And we always will. That's what family does." Emma hugged him, and the room erupted in applause. Later, as the sun set and the stars began to appear, Reaper stood outside with Sarah. They watched Emma playing with some of the younger bikers, laughing freely, her fear long since replaced by joy. "She's happy," Sarah said quietly, "because of you." "She's happy because she's strong," Reaper replied. "Like her mother," Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We both are, thanks to all of you. You didn't just save our lives. You gave us a reason to believe in people again." And as the stars filled the Montana sky, vast, endless, eternal, Reaper thought about the night it all began. The knock, the storm, the ride into darkness. He thought about his daughter, and he thought about the promise he had made to himself that night, to never look away when someone needed help, to never let fear or apathy win. The Iron Ridge Motorcycle Club wasn't just a club anymore. It was a family, a force for good in a world that often forgot what that meant. And as long as they rode, they would keep that promise. The engines roared to life one more time that night, not to ride out, but to remind everyone who heard them, in the mountains, in the valleys, in the small towns and forgotten places, that there were still people who would come when called, that there were still heroes on the road. Thank you for watching this story of courage, brotherhood, and redemption. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. Ride safe and never forget, heroes come in all forms.